Moving along, it is now my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Professor Yukiko Uchida, Professor of Social and Cultural Psychology at Kokoro Research Center. Her research focuses on the psychological mechanism behind emotions and social relationships and their cultural variations. Please welcome Professor Uchida.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to this symposium about the interdependence and well-being. And today, I'd like to talk about the well-being in interdependent context, conceptualization, and social implications from cultural psychology. Maybe some of you don't know about what is the cultural psychology. So I try to briefly explain the concept of the cultural psychology. Cultural psychologists investigate how the meaning system in each cultural context, nation, institution, and community connects and interacts with our psychological mechanisms such as emotion, behavior, and cognition. And the cultural psychology shows that the integration of the knowledge that emerges from diverse cultures gives us leads on how we should respond to social issues. So the cultural psychology have the method of the related to the social psychology. So we do some more experimental research as well as a survey research, more large survey research as well, and do the statistical analysis. So today I will show some of my research conclusions and maybe give some hint to think about what is the interdependence happiness context. So here's the overview of this presentation. So the larger research question here is that can interdependent happiness be a meaningful factor to promote well-being for the future environment? And for these research questions, I'd like to give you some 3 points during this presentation. So first is what types of happiness, well-being are valued across cultures. And I will show some cross-cultural studies of meaning of happiness and in its measurement. And then we propose the interdependent happiness in the Japanese context and how to measure and valuables about the interdependence. And secondly, I'd like to talk about how do community-based activities promote interdependence. So my data suggested that farming communities produce interdependence through collective activities. The reason why I like to raise up some community approaches because today's third speaker, Dr. Watanabe, he has some presentation about the community-based island-based community. So I think this is maybe the good connection between my presentation and his presentation. And third point is so how do interdependent communities face collective threats challenges, such as under COVID-19 situations, as Professor Kawai talked about in the opening remarks, that we face with such kind of the collective threat, and how to overcome such kind of the threat through the interdependent conceptualization. So maybe I will conclude the sustainability of well-being of individuals and societies through interdependence. That is the kind of the important topics. Okay, so from the first point, I'd like to talk about the well-being of individuals and the societies. In an increasingly globalized world, our social lives and pursuit of well-being, happiness have become more individualistic with greater emphasis on personal happiness. For example, let me think about the example of the smartphone usage. Like maybe decades ago, we sometimes compete what kind of the program channel of the TV show we should choose because among the family members because we only have the one TV, and I like to watch the animation, but my father would like to watch the baseball game. Some kind of the conflict there. But nowadays, we have a lot of the personalized device, like a smartphone, for example, and maybe we don't have any conflict among the family members, and then also we have optimization of the personal happiness using such kind of smartphone. But on the other hand, maybe it seems like more likely to be how to pursue happiness itself is more likely to be individualized with such kind of technologies. And also the pursuit of self-actualization with self-esteem and an achievement, such kind of goal is more likely to be pronounced in these cultural, globalized world context. For example, and this is the data from my colleagues, Kuba Chris in Poland. He suggested that personal happiness seeking is quite related to the value of individualism. So here the axis means the correlation of with the individualism. So each country have the score of the individualism. And it seems like so those countries who have a higher individualism have a more likely to pursue the personal life satisfaction compared to the family interdependent happiness. So again, maybe the individualism societies promote the happiness of the personal satisfaction and the individualism-oriented happiness. So what is the personal happiness then? So in psychology, this scale, the life satisfaction scale, developed by Professor Ed Diener in the United States, had more likely to be prevailed and used frequently in cross-cultural studies. So as you can see, the life satisfaction scale is more likely to focus attention to the self and also the actualization of the self. Like I am satisfied with my life, and then the condition of my life is excellent. So it's more likely to be focus attention to what kind of achievement I have done for my lifestyle and so on. So this is more likely to be, maybe we can conceptualize this as a personal happiness and a personal life satisfaction. And with using this scale, there are several kind of the country level analysis. And one of the data, we suggested that the cross-cultural comparison of life satisfaction in the East Asian countries, the really quite low compared to the other countries. And then especially in Korea and the Japanese have a lower score of the such kind of life satisfaction scale. So maybe of course, we can conclude why such kind of the cultural difference is there. Maybe some people argue that the East Asian cultural context, we too much suppress our feeling of the life satisfaction or personal well-beings under the threat of the collective norm pressure. So that is maybe one reason. But also, as a cultural psychologist, I like to think about the meaning of happiness across cultural context. So what is the difference? Maybe such kind of life satisfaction is really accepted in the East Asian context or not? That is my question. So I conducted a study of asking the people to generate the meaning of and the desirability of happiness and well-being in Japan and in the United States. And we found that the Americans more likely to generate the positive meaning of happiness. When they thinking about what is the meaning of happiness, what is the consequence of happiness, so that's a question we had. And actually the data suggested that over 97% of the generated items of the meaning of happiness is very positive. So because of course happiness is a very positive thing. But compared to the United States, it's interestingly, in Japanese case, of course, we have the meaning of the happiness, shiawase or kofuku in Japanese is very good, the meaning. But still, the generated meaning of happiness is not so always positive. Like we found that only 68% of the generated meaning of happiness is positive. But the rest of the generated items were somewhat ambivalent or negative meaning. So maybe some even think about what is the negative meaning of happiness. Maybe you might wonder what it is. And actually, we try to map the generated items to the two-dimensional spaces with the statistical analysis. And we found that there are several groups of the negative meaning of happiness in Japanese context. As you can see, one group is transcendental reappraisal. This is more likely to be neutral meaning of happiness, but it says maybe happiness does not last long, or I am not aware of it when I am very happy. So this is more likely to be, again, quite related to the East Asian, the cultural value in the context, but maybe it's more likely to be, think about the transcendental, not absorbed in the personal life satisfaction and happiness. And then also, interestingly, the other group of the negative meaning of happiness is very connected to the social disruption and interdependence, I mean. So here, I elicit the envy of others if I express it in the wrong way, or maybe, and also the other example is if I feel the too much happiness, maybe my kind of social relationship is maybe damaged. So that kind of the notion of the interdependencies is quite connected to the meaning of happiness in the Japanese context. And of course, there's several positive groups there, like personal achievement and social harmony, or maybe positive hedonic experience, like I feel smile, or I feel very enjoyable, blah, blah, blah. So I think maybe the context of the in Japan is more likely to be interdependent conceptualization of happiness. So what is the interdependent happiness? So happiness seeking often emphasizes the pursuit of a balance and harmony in such context with relational and transcendental meanings. And this is very connected to the conceptualization of the self-ways developed by Marcus and Kitayama, leading scholars of the cultural psychology. And they suggested that there are types of the model of the agency and the self. So one is independence model. So the self is, of course, connected to others, but the boundary of each person is more clear, and then also attribute of the self, like ability, skill, attitudes, motivation, emotion, so on. This is more likely to be internalized and personalized of the self, within the self. But in contrast to the independence model, there's interdependence model of the self and the agency. Here, the self is more likely to be connected to connected is not like a socially connected, rather maybe the conceptually connected. So the definition of the self itself is very dependent on the social context, like thinking about the me at home or me at workplace might be the kind of the different types of the me there. So it's more because of the influence of the situation and the context. And then also because of this, the ability, motivation, and the emotion, that kind of the self-way is not just internalized, rather maybe connected to the social context, like self with other people or self with my family members and so on. So based on this conceptualization, of course, that again, it's plausible that the well-being and happiness are more likely to be interdependent in such with the interdependent self-ways in Japanese context. And then also another example of the thinking about the interdependence is the balance seeking, and also the discrepancy between each person, and then also the some related effect of the each person's well-being. So yeah, I try to depict the two types of the communities. So one is community A, so average score of happiness, like within the 10-point scale, for example, and the average score of the group community A is 7. So that's maybe good society. Like some people say, oh, I am very happy, so I got 10. And then also some people, they say, oh, my satisfaction of the life is the 4, something like that. And please think about the community B instead. In that case, the average score of the happiness is lower than the happiness of the community A. But for this community, the more likely to be their well-being itself is interconnected to each other, and then also the kind of the discrepancy between each individual's well-being is not like a larger as compared to the community A. And also maybe in the community B types of the strategy, the one person's happiness level might be influenced to the other person. So again, so the group B is more likely to be interdependent happiness style, and group A is more likely to achievement competition types of the happiness. So of course, the which is better is very difficult to say. And I mean, like there are several types of the society, maybe pursuing such kind of community A type, like under the competition and having some people get something and contribute to society. So that's one solution. But community B solution is try to seek some harmony, balance, and have some maintaining some societal goals together. So yeah, so again, this is the kind of the choice of the society, which way they should go. And then also this might be related to the culture values and the strategies. So based on this idea, I developed the interdependent happiness scale based on the relationality and transcendental thinking and the harmonious related pursuit of happiness. And compared to life satisfaction scale, the interdependent happiness scale is more likely to be think about not only self, but also the other people. So like I believe that I and those around me are happy, or I feel that I'm being positively evaluated by others around me. So this is containing somehow like relationships, and then also the seeking stable life and the balance seeking life, blah, blah, blah. And with using this scale, cross-cultural comparison of the interdependent happiness scale, the Japan and Korea have kind of the same the level type of the meaning score of the interdependent happiness. And interestingly, it developed with the Japanese context, but still other countries too like evaluate the interdependent happiness in their context too. So I think maybe under the globalized world, I said like personal happiness is more likely to be salient, but still they also have some interdependent conceptualization of happiness too. And maybe now try to face with some collective threat and thinking about how we cooperate each other. Then maybe such kind of the interdependence of the happiness might work for something to challenge this collective threat under this this social context. But again, so how do we maintain a good society in terms of the personal happiness? So as I mentioned, like there are several solutions. Of course, one is empowerment and one is interdependence. So I try to explain this. So here we have experienced a lot of the social dilemma between self-interest and the environmental utility. And the well-known phenomenon of the tragedy of the commons is very quite clear and visible under the globalization. Like, of course, the environmental pollution and discard some garbage with the self-interest. And also like, COVID-19 pandemic situation, we wear the mask, and the mask is not only protect themselves, but also try to protect not to spread the virus to others. So this is always, so we have some conflict model of the self-interest versus the collective structure of the well-being, and how to make a solution. And one solution is in terms of the individualism and independence, like increasing pro-sociality through individualism. And by individual intrinsic motivation and emotion, in that case, is very important, like a pride and self-esteem and empowerment. Like, I like to change the world, or I can change the world. Such kind of belief system is quite strong in the individualistic cultural context, because education is quite connected to the empowerment structure. So you can do it, you should do it, you have to think about that, you have to motivate to change the world. So that kind of system is really maybe prevailed, especially in the North American cultural context. I think this is one of the solution, of course. But from a cultural psychological point of view, maybe we have to think about are there any other paths to maintain the balance between well-being and the individual and societies. So the other option is in terms of the interdependence. So because in some cultural context, individualized empowerment, you can do it. It's not as effective, such as in an American cultural context. So for Japanese, for example, empowerment is sometimes it's very difficult to apply to the regulate of the behavior of the self because they have not so much the high agentic personality and more likely to be focus attention to the relational, and then also like self-esteem is not so high as the American sample. So yeah, again, the empowerment is quite sometimes, of course, positive message, but sometimes it's very difficult to conduct the following the norms of the self-empowerment. So and then also especially during an extraordinary and less controllable threat, which requires cooperation, tolerance, or patience. Maybe empowerment sometimes very, the power of the empowerment is deteriorated under such the threat. So then maybe interdependence is maybe re-evaluated. And actually, the collective values encouraged people to follow lockdown orders during the COVID-19 pandemic. So this is one of the studies suggested. So maybe such kind of extraordinary threat, maybe compared to the empowerment, maybe thinking about the collective way is one of the solution, I guess. So interdependent happiness is an orientation that considers one's own happiness and the happiness of the others and inseparable and simulations, which helps solve the tragedy of commons. And actually, I conducted the data collection for several years from the local samples in the Japanese communities, like a town area, like each town area hold around 100 households, and try to see what kind of the subjective well-being were actualized in such communities within Japan, I mean. And we found that the subjective well-being is very connected to some types of the interdependence. I label it the social capital within communities, like a trust system or reciprocity system within the community members. This is very connected to each other. And then also those types of the subjective well-being plus the interdependent social capital promotes prosociality, like a contribution to the society, like joining the town meetings or helping festivals. Yeah, those types of the helping behavior is very connected to the well-being plus interdependence in the Japanese community. And such prosociality promotes the intergenerational co-creation, like thinking about the future generation and also thinking about sustainability. So again, here the well-being plus social capital or interdependence is quite important. Of course, some people really question like, so not always interdependence is effective. And under some world, if the relational mobility is quite high and they have more likely to be contract-based competition, then maybe personal achievement-based the strategy is more likely to be effective. And then maybe we have to think about which community the interdependence is quite important. And some cultural psychological studies that suggested that socio-ecological environment is quite important to promote interdependence or independence. For example, our data suggested that farming communities promote collectiveness and interdependence and the holistic thinking style compared to the fishing herding communities or other communities. We sampled the 400 communities within Japan with a large survey data, and we sampled from the farming areas. This is the green X means the sampling the location of the farming areas. And also the blue dot means the fishing communities in sample areas. And the other areas too were included in our analysis. And then also we identified the farmers and the fishers and the others in each community members. And we found that in the individual level, farmers are more likely to be interdependent and compared to the fishermen or others. And then also in the community level, farming area, people who lived in the farming area, including non-farmers too, have interdependence compared to the people who lived in the other areas, like fishing areas and other areas. So it means that farming area have some kind of the meaning structure or meaning system of the interdependence, not only among the member of the farmers, but also including the other types of the people who are not engaged in the farming itself, but maybe they have more kind of the communal level of the interdependence. And why? We found that the ratio of the farmers in each community produce the participation in the collective activity. So the farming area actually have a lot of the collective activity, like festivals and town meetings and maintaining irrigation system and so on, because the farming in Japanese context is very connected to the rice farming. And maintaining the water stream or irrigation system is quite important for them to survive as a farmers. So the result, the farming community tried to encourage the people, including non-farmers, to join the activities to maintain the irrigation systems or doing some festivals and so on. So they have a lot more collective activities, and then the participation ratio in collective activities is higher for farming areas compared to the other areas. And this participation in the collective works, collective activity promote interdependence at community level. So we found that maybe doing something together is a key factor to promote interdependence types of happiness, and then also some solution to face with some challenges like farming area, of course, have some trouble of the water stream or typhoon attack within Japanese context, and then also rice cropping is of course very hard, and they collaborate together through some kind of the events, meetings, and so on. So maybe interdependence is quite necessary for such kind of the context. So with a larger scale of the maintaining farming communities. Yeah, so with this analogy, maybe this is the last part of my talk. We think about how we challenge the collective threat, I mean. So we experienced the COVID-19 pandemic for 2 years. That's very long. And today's symposium hybrid. Of course, the hybrid symposium opened the door to have a open social interaction with lots of the members in the community. Not only, but today maybe the audience is not only from Japan, but also from the other countries. So that's quite the interesting thing to open our mindset. But still, of course, we are facing with lots of trouble. Like we have to wear masks, and also this is very difficult to have a party, for example. That's quite the collective threat in this context. Yeah, so cultural psychological perspective on the COVID-19 pandemic is maybe faced with the pandemic, we have been required to control our behavior, but this is not an easy task. And then also there are several types of the control, like both individual level control, like wearing mask, the washing hands, and then also societal control. Some country really regulate the lockdown control or some behavior regulation control by government or societal level. And actually, interestingly, one of the reports says that cross-country regression total death per million as of January 2021, the Asia-Pacific region has far lower mortality rates after controlling for such structural factors. So it's very interestingly, now of course there are some waves of the cases, positive cases, but generally speaking, the East Asian countries lower death cases compared to the other countries. And why? And maybe some data suggested that maybe collectivistic regulation by individual and societal level, so interaction with them is quite effective. So citizens in more collectivistic counties of the US, and those who are in more collectivistic countries showed higher percentage of mask usage, and then also follow the lockdown norms. So that's a quite interesting story, like maybe collectivism might affect something about the COVID-19 regulation. And we analyzed the data that within Japanese context, again, like interdependence and the behavioral adjustment, this is more likely to be follow the norms of the social requirement, is very connected to the COVID-19 regulation. So COVID-19 regulation means how frequently they wear a mask or how frequently they wash their hands and so on. So that's kind of behavior is very connected to the interdependence. So maybe in some cultural context, like a Japanese context, not like the maybe compared to empowerment, like independence or empowerment, rather maybe thinking about interdependence and collectiveness is maybe effective for promote such kind of regulation. And then also this kind of the regulation and the threat itself is connected to the well-being from the through the meaning-making process. With the collaboration with the Dr. Nakayama, who is a promoter of today, we suggested that the thinking about the COVID-19 threat and somehow the feeling of the threat-based, for example, like I feel the emotionally moved, then the people feel the meaning-making process, like with self-transcendent values with the interdependence orientation. Like I value my relationship with family members and friends under such the threat condition. So this means that under we think about the threat, maybe we reevaluate our ordinary life and then also relationship or support of the family members and friends and so on. Maybe some of you revalue your own social interactions with friends and family members during the COVID-19 pandemic because you missed such social interaction. And such kind of the missing something promote evaluation of the ordinary existed the structure of the social relationship. So this is very re-evaluation of the interdependence, I think. And the re-evaluation promote well-being. So again, maybe, of course, that's a threat is very negative thing. So it's a very intuitively, it's very contradictory to why the threat makes the well-being. But this is like not hedonic well-being, rather maybe general, types of eudaimonic well-being. So maybe thinking about the solution of the some value structure and self-transcendental meaning-making process promote our maybe perception or re-evaluation of our well-being. So here's a summary. So my research question was, can interdependent happiness be a meaningful factor to promote well-being for the future environment? And I talked about the conceptualization of the interdependent happiness, and maybe the community, the collective structure is promote such kind of the interdependence happiness, and this can face with and challenges of the societal threat. So here's a conclusion. So perception of the interdependence between self and others and self and society would promote well-being, and especially under contexts which require cooperation, collaboration to solve social issues. And interdependent happiness, balance seeking might be a meaningful factor, promote well-being for the future environmental Earth. So here's the last slide. So based on this such kind of the interdependence of the well-being, I launched a new project with JST. So the title is Co-Creation of the Individual and the Collective Well-being, measuring the states of space and communities to support individuals' optimization. So that from this study, I think with using the technologies to measure the state of both individuals and the collective well-being and explore the factors that affect how both states of well-being mutually constitute each other, and show that the optimization of the individual's well-being is supported by the states of spaces and communities, and seek methods to creating optimal spaces and communities through the practical implementation. So not only thinking about the personalized happiness, rather maybe thinking about how we can think about the social states, and maybe this is we can say social sensing, and not only just the optimization of the individual pursuit of happiness, rather maybe thinking about the individuals and the society together is kind of the important research question in this context. Okay, so this is the end of my talk. Thank you very much for your attention.